Hey Miss Vaughn, my name is Caitlyn George and I'm in your Thursday 9:30 a.m. class, and I'm going to be talking about my observations. For my first observation, I'm going to tell you about my kindergarten class. I just did a regular kindergarten class and it was Miss Bell's. I did it at Pangburn Elementary School at 10 to 11 a.m. on November 11th. I just wanted to say Miss Bell, her classroom was very structured and it was unlike any other kindergarten classroom I've ever been in. She really knew how to run her classroom and had really good classroom management, and that's what I think is a grow about her classroom, is that it was just so well organized. All the kids knew all of her little tricks. Like whenever they weren't listening, she would say, "Oh, kindergarten," and then they would repeat her and they would stop what they were doing and just drop everything that they were doing and listen to her and be quiet. Also, she would say frozen popsicles and they would all put their arms up and stop what they were doing and listen to whatever she had to say. She was very calm when it came to them. She didn't get easily mad at them because constantly they were tapping on her shoulder and trying to tell her something. And she just, she listened. She was a very good type of person to be a kindergarten teacher. A grow that I wish there was more like, even though she had structure, like with what she was doing, it just, the classroom as a whole was very unorganized, and I wish it would have just been tied together a little more. It kind of stressed me out. For my next observation, I'm going to talk about my first grade, and I observed Miss Kirby's class from 8:15 to 9:15 a.m. on October 26th. It was my first class that I observed. It is at Pangburn as well. All of mine are at Pangburn, but it was my first classroom to observe in for this project, and I just didn't know what to expect. But she was very sweet, and I loved how the classrooms, like, they switched up. They would have kind of like a homeroom to begin with, and all of the children in her original classroom would be in there finishing up homework and any work they had from the day before. And then after like 15 minutes or so, they would switch classrooms all around. There were some kids that were in her classroom who would stay there, and then some of them would leave. And so they all switched around, I guess maybe based on their reading levels or their math levels. So they all were mixed around, and they just did little activities together. And she was just very patient, and she as well had good class management. But I wish that she would enforce more of like raising hands and stuff, because when I was in there, the children they didn't quite seem to not blurt out. Like they won't blurt it out, they wouldn't raise their hands. So I feel like she needed to work a little bit on classroom stuff, like manners and stuff like that. For my next observation, I'm going to be talking about my second grade classroom. I observed Miss Jolie Tharp at Pangburn between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. on November 11th. She was a very sweet teacher. It was a Friday, and they had a lot of assemblies that day, so they weren't really doing much, but they were doing their centers, and she was testing, like pulling some kids to the side and testing. And the kids, what I really liked about the classroom is how second graders, you can start to see that they're becoming more self-sufficient, and they really like to be on technology. And I noticed that with a lot of the other grades that I observed, the higher up grades. But I started to notice it with the second graders, because they were just it was very quiet in the room when I walked in, much different than the kindergarten class that I had observed before. But I loved that about it. But the thing that I didn't like much about it was because since it was such a busy day, there wasn't really much to observe, because the kids were in their centers and working individually. So I didn't really have a lot of experience with her teaching and seeing how they all react together as a class with lessons and discussions. So I really wish that it would have been like that, but it's understandable. For my next one, I'm going to be talking about my third grade class, and this was my it was my resource and special ed class. It wasn't just third grade, it was a mixture of all the elementary school grades, but there was a lot of third graders in there, so I felt like it should count against the third grade. But it was Miss Powell and in Miss Amanda's class. It was mainly Miss Powell's class, but Miss Amanda was like her helper. And I really liked seeing how all of them were just a mixture of grades. It was kind of hectic because they were all on different levels, and since it's just like a resource special ed class, there are some kids who are in there all day, and then there are some kids who only go in there just for one lesson or just for one skill, because they didn't need constant attention all the time. They just needed a little bit of help here and there with their reading and their math skills. I liked being in that atmosphere because I had never seen it before. Like, it was new to me. But something that I didn't like, it was very hectic. You have to have that personality and be very patient, because a lot of the children would get frustrated and cry. Like, they had to constantly give children breaks because they couldn't sit at their desk without getting mad because they were getting questions wrong, or they weren't playing the games right, or they were losing. So it's a hectic atmosphere, and you just have to have a very special, like, well preserved. You can't really show much emotion because it will affect them especially. For 4th grade, I observed Miss Holloway's classroom at Pangburn between 11 and 12 p.m. or 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on October 26th. I have to say that the 4th grade class was so self-sufficient, and they were so good. Like, I don't even remember being in 4th grade and us being that well educated. Like, these children were just all the way up here. They were very, very good with their discussions, and they started to begin using more, like, much bigger words. Like, their vocabulary, you can tell, was expanding. They were talking about rocks and natural resources, and like non-renewable and renewable resources, and they just did really good at connecting old lessons or old things they had learned into their new discussions. So that's what I really liked about that class. And they were all just very polite and just very self-sufficient. I love that. There wasn't really anything bad about that classroom. She was just very lenient with them. Like, she trusted them very much. At one point, before they went off to do their own computer work, she just said, "Okay, bathroom break," and all of them got up to go to the bathroom all at once. Like, it wasn't an individual thing. So she just had a lot of trust in the children. So for my self-contained classroom, since Pangburn is a smaller district, the children in this classroom weren't like seriously disabled. There were some who were and who needed constant attention and were there the whole time, but there was also some who, would only go in there every so often. It was like a mixture of a self-contained class and a special ed class. But it was Miss Barnett's classroom. It was a mixture of 5th and 6th grade. When I was in there was only 4 students because it was before lunch. She said she gets a bigger class after lunch, but it was the only time she had available. But when I first arrived in the classroom, since there was a small group, they knew I was coming. And the children, they were just very excited. They were all so happy, and I really liked that about it. It's just very laid-back class. All of them just would work on different skills. There was one little girl who, she was in 5th grade, but she was reading at a 1st and 2nd grade level, and like her reading skills were just very low compared to a lot of other children, and she was in there all day. But one thing I noticed when she was reading is she would read words wrong, or she would mix them together, like get 2 words mixed together and make them one word, and then whenever the teacher would correct her and make her repeat it, she would get frustrated because she didn't want to repeat herself. But I noticed that they get frustrated very easily. The other kids were just coloring or cutting things out or working on homework, and since they were in different grades, it was just different homework. The one thing I didn't like about it was because since it was a small class, the kids were getting easily distracted. There was one boy in the class, and he would constantly turn around and stare at me or try to talk to me. And I mean, I couldn't really say much because it's not my classroom and I was told just to sit and observe. But like, it was kind of hard because he would just turn around and ask me questions. I wanted to answer, but he needed to do work. But I didn't want to tell him, oh, you need to do your work, because I'm not the teacher. But Miss Barnett did really well at trying to get him back on track, but he just constantly kept turning around and getting distracted. So it was just really hard about that. My last observation was for my gifted and talented class. The teacher that I observed for in Pangburn was Miss Gallian. She's the gifted and talented coordinator of the entire school district of Pangburn, and the only time she had available for me was a kindergarten enrichment class. And it's not necessarily a GT class, but it's taught in the same way that a GT class would be taught. It is meant for kindergartners to get on a higher level than they normally would be on. It's making them think outside the box and be critical thinkers and just work much harder than they normally would just in their regular classrooms, and talk about things on a higher level than they would normally talk about them. One thing I really liked about this class was the structure. She had a whole lesson planned out. It flows together perfectly. I just loved how her management was, and maybe it's because she teaches so many different grades and you can tell that she's been doing it for a while. She was just very good with that. But since it was a kindergarten class and not all of them are GT, they're just like working on it, it was just really hard to keep them on track for her. Like, you could tell that sometimes she would get a tiny bit frustrated because she couldn't keep them just all quiet. But for the most part, they were a very good class and that they listened very well. So that was my observations, and I really enjoyed doing them, and I can't wait to do them again in the future.